You are digging into the earth, not for water, not for roots, not for shelter. You are digging because someone you loved stopped breathing, and you do not know what else to do with your hands. This is not a modern scene. This happened tens of thousands of years before written history existed, and the evidence is still in the ground, waiting. What did grief actually look like before religion had rules for it? Before funerals had a script? Before anyone had a word for the feeling sitting in your chest right now? Before grief counselors, sympathy cards, or scheduled visiting hours existed at all? Let's go back and find out. For a long time, many scientists assumed that early humans, and especially their close relatives, the Neanderthals, simply left their dead where they fell. No ceremony, no feeling, just biology moving on. That assumption has not held up well. In the 1950s and 1960s, archaeologist Ralph Solecki excavated a cave called Shanidar in northern Iraq. Inside, he found the remains of several Neanderthals, a now extinct close relative of modern humans who lived alongside your ancestors for tens of thousands of years. One skeleton, later known as Shanidar 4, was found with unusually high concentrations of ancient pollen surrounding the body. Solecki proposed something remarkable. He suggested the body may have been deliberately laid on a bed of flowers. The idea captured public imagination instantly. A Neanderthal buried with flowers tens of thousands of years ago. It reframed how people saw an entire species. Not brutish, not empty-headed. Capable, perhaps, of something close to mourning. For decades afterward, other researchers pushed back. Some argued the pollen could have blown in naturally, or been carried into the cave by burrowing rodents, rather than placed there on purpose. The debate never fully closed. Then, in 2020, a research team led by paleoanthropologist Emma Pomeroy returned to Shanidar Cave with modern excavation techniques far more precise than what existed in Solecki's era. They uncovered another well-preserved Neanderthal skeleton, given the name Shanidar Z. The body was found curled on its side, in a position that appeared deliberately arranged, in a location repeatedly used for burial over time. The new findings strongly supported an idea that had been debated for 60 years. Some Neanderthals, at least some of the time, appear to have treated their dead with intention, not randomly discarded. Does that surprise you? It surprised a lot of scientists too. Shanidar was not an isolated case either. Further west, at a rock shelter in France called La Ferracie, archaeologists uncovered multiple Neanderthal burials clustered together, including infants and children, positioned in ways that appeared deliberate rather than accidental. And in caves at Skul and Kavze in what is now Israel, some of the earliest known Homo sapiens burials, dating back close to 100,000 years, included bodies placed in flexed positions alongside animal bones, and, in at least one case, a piece of red ochre resting near the hands. Different sites, different time periods, different populations, yet a similar pattern kept appearing. Bodies were not simply abandoned. They were placed. Now step further into the scene. Not 50,000 years ago, closer to your own species, roughly 34,000 years ago, at a site in what is now Russia called Sungir, archaeologist Randall White, who spent years studying Sungir's remains and artifacts, documented one of the most elaborate Ice Age burials ever discovered. Two children buried head-to-head in a single grave covered in an almost unimaginable number of ivory beads. Researchers estimate roughly 10,000 carved beads across both bodies. Each bead, made from mammoth ivory, would have taken significant time to shape and drill by hand. Multiply that labor across 10,000 beads spent on two children who could not contribute food, tools, or defense to the group. Think about what that means. In a world where every single hour mattered for survival, where food had to be hunted or gathered by hand, where warmth and shelter took constant effort to maintain, someone chose to spend an extraordinary number of hours on ornaments for the dead, not for the living. For grief, the Sungir burial also included something else researchers find striking. Alongside the children were long, straight mammoth ivory spears, taller than an adult human, so precisely carved and straightened that modern archaeologists have struggled to fully explain the technique used to make them. Objects like these were valuable. They took real skill and real time to produce, and they were placed in the ground, never to be used again, buried alongside two children who had not yet lived long enough to have made such objects themselves. Whoever made that choice was not thinking about practical value. They were thinking about what these children deserved to carry with them. So let's reconstruct what this might have actually felt like. Someone in your group has died. Maybe an elder, whose knowledge of which plants were poisonous, which paths avoided predators, and which stars marked the changing seasons is now gone with them. Maybe a child, whose future you had already started imagining. There is no undertaker, no coffin maker, no religious authority arriving to explain what happens next. There is only your group and your hands and whatever your culture has taught you to do in this moment. The rest of the group does not simply return to normal activity right away, either. Evidence from many ancient campsites suggests periods of reduced movement around the time of a death, as if daily routines briefly paused. Hunting parties may have stayed closer to camp. Foraging trips may have been shorter than usual. None of this can be proven with certainty from stone and bone alone, but the pattern is consistent enough across enough different sites that many archaeologists now treat it as a genuine signal rather than a coincidence. You dig. Someone else gathers flowers, if the season allows it, or beads or red ochre, a natural iron-rich pigment your ancestors used across many burial sites to color both bodies and tools, possibly symbolizing blood, life, or protection. You arrange the body with care, not haste. You may curl it into a resting position the way it might rest in sleep, rather than leaving it flat and exposed. There is likely no single fixed ritual. Different groups in different regions, across tens of thousands of years, probably developed their own versions of what needed to happen. Some may have used fire, some may have wrapped the body in hide, some may have simply sat beside it for a day or several days, before finally placing it in the ground. What seems to connect nearly all of these ancient sites is not a shared script, but a shared refusal to treat the moment as ordinary. Archaeologist Paul Pettitt, who has spent decades studying the origins of human burial practices, has argued that these early burials likely served more than one purpose at once. Practical reasons certainly existed. Burial reduces smell, deters scavenging animals, and lowers the risk of disease spreading through a small, close contact group. But Pettit's research also points towards something beyond hygiene. The consistent presence of grave goods, deliberate body positioning, and symbolic materials like ochre across many ancient sites suggests these acts were also emotional and social, a way of marking that this individual mattered, that their absence changed something. Here is where the story takes an unexpected turn. You might assume that grief, real grief, the kind that involves ritual, symbolism, and effort, is a relatively recent human development. Something that arrived alongside religion or writing or complex civilization. The evidence suggests otherwise. If Neanderthals, a separate branch of the human family tree that went extinct roughly 40,000 years ago, were also engaging in intentional burial, then the roots of mourning may stretch back even further than Homo sapiens itself. Grief may not be something civilization invented. It may be something civilization simply gave new forms to. This raises an uncomfortable but fascinating question. If grief existed before language had fully developed the way modern language works, what did it actually feel like? Some researchers propose that early expressions of loss may have relied heavily on physical acts rather than words. Touching the body, staying close to it rather than immediately moving on, repeating certain motions, which, similar to how many animals, including elephants and chimpanzees, have been observed lingering near deceased group members, sometimes touching or guarding the body for extended periods, even when no immediate survival benefit exists. At some sites, archaeologists have also found evidence suggesting graves were revisited over time, rather than sealed once and forgotten. Layers of later activity around the same burial spot, sometimes including additional objects added afterward, which hint at something close to what modern people might recognize as returning to a grave. Not a single event, closed and finished, but an ongoing relationship with the place where someone was laid to rest. Now, bring this back to you. You live in a world with funeral homes, obituaries, scheduled memorial services, and entire industries built around managing death. It can feel clinical sometimes, efficient, almost outsourced. But underneath all of that structure sits something that has not changed in tens of thousands of years. The impulse to mark a death as different from an ordinary event. The instinct to do something with your hands when words are not enough. The strange, powerful pull to leave something behind at the site of loss, whether that is a bouquet of flowers at a roadside memorial, a stone marker, or 10,000 carved beads in an Ice Age grave. Consider how many modern mourning customs still echo these same basic impulses, even across cultures with no direct historical connection to each other. Flowers at grave sites, objects placed with the deceased, communities gathering physically, rather than simply being informed of the news and moving on. Anthropologists studying grief across dozens of modern cultures have repeatedly found this same underlying pattern, even where specific customs differ wildly. Something in human behavior keeps returning to the same basic responses, generation after generation, culture after culture, as if the pattern were older than any single tradition that carries it. When you have stood at a funeral, or placed flowers somewhere significant, or simply sat quietly next to someone who was grieving because you did not know what to say, you were participating in one of the oldest human behaviors that has left physical evidence in the archaeological record. Older than agriculture, older than cities, possibly older than your own species. Grief, it turns out, may not be a modern invention layered on top of a simpler ancient life. It may be one of the oldest threads connecting you to every human, and possibly every Neanderthal who ever stood over a body they were not ready to let go of the next time grief visits your life, and it eventually visits everyone's. You are not experiencing something new that civilization invented to complicate an otherwise simple existence. You are stepping into one of the oldest, most consistently documented behaviors in the entire human story, one written not in words, but in flowers pressed into ancient soil, beads carved by patient hands, and bodies laid down with unmistakable care. You are digging into the earth. Somewhere tens of thousands of years ago, someone else was digging too. Different hands, different tools. The same reason.